Smoke hung like memory over Ridge Hollow, soft at the edges, but heavy enough to choke. It clung to the bark of scorched pines and settled into the folds of every canyon bend, dulling even the sun's sharp eye. Below the ridge, black earth stretched in every direction, broken only by the twisted ribs of fence posts and a few stray hoofprints stamped into the ash. Deputy Ray Carson adjusted her hat, one hand resting on the worn leather grip of her flashlight. Even though the morning light was more than enough to see, she wasn't here for evidence. Or a cleanup. They'd already sent the state crews through. No, Ray had returned because of a phone call from a trail hiker who claimed he saw movement. Something small and golden near the ravine edge. Didn't look like a deer, he'd said. Too still, just standing there. Ray had worked wildfires before. The aftermath was always the same. Confused survivors, rumors clinging like embers, people desperate to believe something had made it out alive. Usually, nothing had, but then she saw it. Not right away. Just a shape, half sunk in shadow near the base of a bent cottonwood. Ray paused, squinted. The wind shifted. What she thought was a log moved its head. A foal. She stepped slowly now, heart hammered with something old and unfamiliar. The foal's legs looked too thin to hold it. Its coat, once likely a soft buckskin, was mottled with soot and clumped mud. Ears twitching, breathing shallow. But what rooted Ray in place wasn't the foal. It was the dog beside it, dead. Clearly, a shepherd mix. Formatted and gray with ash, one paw curled beneath its chest. The foal stood with its muzzle pressed to the dog's neck, nudging once, then again, with a gentle persistence that made Ray's throat tighten. "Hey!" she whispered, crouching low. "I see you." The foal flinched but didn't move. Its eyes met hers, wide, rimmed in smoke, hollow in a way she hadn't seen in years. "It's okay," she said again, softer this time. "You don't have to stay. You did good." Still, it didn't budge. So she waited. The minutes bled together. Her legs ached from crouching. The sun slipped higher, dragging the heat with it. A distant hawk called once, then silence again. The foal's sides rose and fell, but it didn't cry, didn't whimper. It just stood, sentinel to the end. Eventually, the foal lowered its head, not in defeat, but exhaustion. Its legs gave. Ray stepped in, wrapping the blanket she brought tight around its shoulders. Feeling the trembling up close now, when she lifted it into the trailer, she tried not to look back at the dog, but she did, and it stayed with her all the way back to town. Ray didn't take the foal to the shelter. Too loud, too many cages. Instead, she drove past the edge of the map, down a dirt road choked in cottonwood shade, toward the old Carson Ranch, her father's place. Empty for years now, save for dust and silence. Once a training ground for rodeo stock, it had become a graveyard of rusting tack and sagging fence lines. But it was quiet, and right now, that mattered more than anything. She named him brave, not because he acted it, but because he had stayed when he could have run. Brave didn't move much that first day. He stood in the corner of the foaling stall, unmoving, watching motes of dust drift in the barn's fractured light. Ray brought water. "Hey!" He sniffed at both but turned away. She tried not to hover. The vet came just after dusk. Dr. Marla Huxley, gray braid down her back, hands like folded paper. She moved slow but sharp, like someone who had long ago decided nothing would startle her again. "He's not injured," she said after long inspection. "Just malnourished, dehydrated, but he's strong. Stronger than he should be." Ray leaned against the stall door. He wouldn't leave the dog. Marla glanced up, stood over it, like he was guarding. The vet exhaled, low and thoughtful. Animals don't forget kindness. Not ever. Even when we think they weren't old enough to remember. That night, Ray slept in the barn. She didn't tell herself why. She just laid out an old bedroll by the tack room, kept the door cracked open, and listened. Brave didn't make a sound. The next morning, she got the call. A woman named Heather Lang had been confirmed as one of the victims in the fire. Her truck had flipped near the trailhead, possibly trying to outrun the flames. Her body had only recently been identified. They found a melted collar in the debris, the officer said. Dog named Dusty. registered to Heather. Ray's pulse paused. And get this, Heather had been volunteering with an off-grid Mustang sanctuary. You know the kind. Remote-holding pens, no branding, barely legal. She was supposed to transport a foal the morning the fire broke out. Was there a foal found with her? Not that we know of. But the area around her crash site was scorched so badly there's not much left. Ray lowered the phone. She turned to Brave, who still hadn't touched his hay. You weren't just guarding, she whispered. You were mourning. For the first time, Brave blinked. Later that day, Ray returned to the crash site. She didn't bring anyone with her, just a shovel, gloves, and a quiet purpose. Near the edge of the ravine, buried under a layer of soot, she found the dog's tag. The metal was warped but legible. It read, "Dusty, if found, bring him home." She pressed the tag into her palm until it bit the skin. Back at the ranch, she hung it on the inside of Brave's stall, just above eye level. He looked at it once, then again, then walked to the hay and began to eat. That night, Ray sat in the kitchen of the ranch house, staring at nothing. The silence here wasn't the kind that comforted. It was the kind that remembered. Her fingers curled around a chipped mug, the coffee inside gone cold. Brave had stayed. Through fire, through death, through fear no creature that Young should have known. Ray thought of the girl she used to be, the one who believed animals were meant to be led, not followed. Her father had trained horses like warriors. She'd tried to do the same. Until the accident. Until the fire that took her brother and scattered their horses into the wild. Now, looking at Brave, she wasn't sure who was leading who. She rose from the table, walked back to the barn, sat outside the stall, back against the wood, said nothing. In the quiet, Brave stepped forward. His muzzle brushed her shoulder, just once. And for the first time in years, Ray let herself cry. The wind shifted outside. A soft gust stirred the wind chimes her father once hung by the barn door. They hadn't made a sound in years. Until now, the ranch didn't speak in words, but in small shifts of air, in the way it would creak or how the morning light filtered through broken shingles like confession. Ray had never planned to come back. But now, with Brave tucked into the stall that once belonged to her father's prize roper, the place felt less like punishment and more like something still unfinished. Brave had begun to move. Not much, not far, but enough to show that something inside him had softened. He didn't flinch when Ray entered the stall. He followed her scent when she walked past. Sometimes he'd rest his head against the wall and close his eyes, not to sleep but to feel. That was progress. But he still watched the dog tag. Every morning, Ray would find him staring at it. The words melted into the metal. Dusty's name now a kind of owl. Ray didn't disturb the ritual. She just brought feed, replaced the water, and stayed quiet. Brave didn't need her voice. He needed presence. And she, in truth, needed a silence. The second call came a week later, late afternoon. Ray let it ring twice before answering. "We got a girl," the voice said. It was Carrie, a friend from her former department who had moved into youth services. 12 years old. No current placement. They're asking for a short hold until a foster home opens up. 48 hours, max. Ray let the silence stretch. Why me? Because we're out of beds. Because she won't go to a group home. Because she's not a flight risk, not anymore. And because I think she needs somewhere quiet. What's her name? Lila. She doesn't talk much, but she reads people fast. If she stays, she stays. If she bolts, I'll call. No badge, Ray. I know. Ray hung up and stared out at the pasture. Brave stood at the fence line, legs narrow as willows, head tilted toward the wind like he was listening for something ancient. The girl arrived just after sundown in the back seat of a state sedan that didn't quite belong in dirt country. Ray opened the front gate herself, waving the car through. When Lila stepped out, her posture was stiff with distrust. Oversized flannel, faded jeans cuffed 3 times above, 2 big boots. A thin backpack slung over one shoulder like a warning sign. Don't ask what's inside. Hi, Ray said. Lila didn't answer. to scan the yard, the house, the barn. Then her eyes locked on Brave. He was still, watching. Ray held back, waited. Lila moved first. She crossed the gravel without a word, walked up to the fence, and didn't reach out. She just looked. Brave stepped forward. 2 paces, then 3. His nose met the top rail between them. Lila's voice was soft, cracked with disuse. He's sad. Ray exhaled. Yeah, he is. The girl blinked, then leaned her head against a wood rail. Good. Then he'll understand. She didn't need a tour of the house. Ray offered, and Lila shrugged, said she'd rather sleep in the barn. Ray didn't argue. She laid out a cot in the tack room, brought an extra blanket, left the door ajar. The girl didn't say thank you. But when Ray checked on her later, Lila had moved the cot closer to the stall. That night, Brave lay down. First time Ray had seen him do it. The days settled into a rhythm. Ray fed. Lila swept. Brave followed them both with quiet interest. The 3 of them moved like mismatched shadows, never quite in sync, but never fully apart. Ray didn't press Lila for details. The girl didn't offer any, but she took to Brave like he was a language she already knew. One morning, Ray found a faded photograph tucked under the stall's hay bucket. A dog and a girl, Lila younger, maybe 9. The dog looked like Dusty, different coloring, but the same shape of eyes. Ray didn't ask. She just left the photo where it was. Brave had stopped looking at the tag. Now he watched Lila. On the 8th day, a storm came. Not a loud one. No thunder, no lightning. Just long, mournful wind and sheets of cold rain. Brave began to pace. Not wildly, but with rising urgency. Ray stepped into the barn, placed a hand on his flank, whispered, "It's okay. You're safe." But Brave's eyes were wide, dark with memory. Ray knew what was coming. Animals didn't forget. Not the smell of burning or the roar of wind twisted by flame. Lila stood at the stall gate, soaked, shivering. She didn't step back when Brave pressed against the wood. She reached through instead, wrapped her arms around his neck. "He's remembering it," she said, voice dull. Ray swallowed. Probably. He didn't run then. Why is he scared now? Because back then he didn't know what he was losing. The girl looked down. Her fists clenched against Brave's mane. Yeah, that makes sense. They stayed like that until the rain let up. Brave stopped pacing. Ray stepped outside to breathe. Her lungs filled with petrichor and a kind of old sorrow she didn't have a name for. The next morning, Ray returned to the ridge. Not with any official reason. Just a feeling. She climbed down the slope, past the place where the dog had fallen. The earth here was healing, small tufts of green pushing through black soil. She crouched near the old wreckage, ran her fingers through the dirt. There, hidden beneath the crushed license plate, was a curled piece of metal. Another dog tag. She turned it over. "Dusty, bring him home." On the other side, "If you find her, she'll be with him." Ray's heart paused. The foal hadn't wandered. He'd followed Heather, and Dusty had stayed with them both. She brought the tag back to the barn and showed Lila. The girl didn't speak for a long time. Then, without looking up, she said, "You think Brave remembers her?" "I think he remembers everything." Later that evening, Ray brought out her father's old journals, leather-bound, cracked at the spine. She'd never read them. Not since the fire that took her brother. Not since the accident that hollowed the ranch. She thumbed through until she found a sketch. A Mustang, unique striping across the shoulders. A rare coat pattern. She flipped pages. More drawings. Notes. Possible rare strain. Only seen once near the Trinity Ridge Basin. The markings match Brave. Maybe he was born wild. Ray murmured. Maybe she was rescuing him. Lila traced the sketch with one finger. So he was never meant to be owned? No, Ray said, but maybe he was meant to be remembered. The barn grew still again. Brave shifted in the straw, his breath slow and even. The radio on Ray's belt crackled to life. Ridge Hollow. Possible flare-up near Sector 9. Crew en route. Winds pushing west. Lila looked at her. "Isn't that near where we found him?" Ray nodded. Are you going? Yeah. Can I come? Ray hesitated. Lila added, Brave should come too. He's not ready. Yes, he is. He's already gone through it once. Ray studied her. Then Brave. Then the ridge line glowing faint in the distance. She didn't answer. She just grabbed her keys. The wind scraped dry leaves across the gravel as Ray pulled the truck off the main road and onto a fire trail. So narrow, it seemed forgotten by time. Brave shifted in the trailer behind them, hooves soft against the rubber flooring. He hadn't made a sound since they left the ranch. Just stood steady, eyes forward, as if the very air was calling him back. Lila sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, jaw set in that stubborn angle Ray had learned to stop questioning. You sure about this? Ray asked. Lila didn't turn. He needs to see it. Ray wasn't sure who she meant, him or herself. The fire had been small, quick-moving, snuffed out by the overnight crew before it reached the heart of Ridge Hollow. But it had come close. Too close to where Brave had once stood beside a dead dog, refusing to move until kindness broke through. They parked beside the old trailhead. The trees here bore blackened scars like old soldiers, proof of pain endured, not surrendered to. Ray opened the trailer slowly, hands cautious, breath tight. Brave stepped down like he'd done 100 times. No panic, no trembling, just stillness. Then a long, exhale breath. He looked around, ears twitching toward the ridge. Ray and Lila followed his lead up the path, moving slow. Brave walked between them, neither driven nor dragged. The smoke from the flare-up had already drifted on, but its memory lingered in the ash beneath their boots. As they neared the bend, Ray saw the spot. The tree, the same one bent at the base, half burned, half alive. The clearing, the ravine, everything came back in a sudden rush. The way the foal had stood beside the shepherd's body, the way it had waited like something sacred was owed. Brave stopped. He lowered his head, ears flicking. Lila stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. This is where it happened, isn't it? Ray nodded. Right here. The girl knelt, brushing the soot away with her sleeve. She pulled something for her jacket, a piece of folded paper, yellowed at the corners. Ray leaned closer. It was a drawing, simple but detailed. A foal and a dog, side by side. Above them, a ribbon of fire curling like a sky serpent. Brave's eyes were the same in the sketch, wide, sad, steady. I drew a year ago, Lila said, not looking up, after they sent me to my second foster home. I didn't know why. I just did. Ray didn't ask how. Some things weren't explained. They were remembered before they were ever lived. Brave stepped closer to the drawing. He sniffed at it, then nuzzled Lila's shoulder. Something broke in the silence. Not loud, just a rustle. A branch snapping uphill. Ray stood fast, one hand brushing instinctively near her side. But no threat came, only the sound of hoofbeats. She turned. A small band of Mustangs emerged from the ridge, dirty, lean, but alive. 6, maybe 7. One of them, heavily pregnant, limped as she walked. Brave froze. Then he whinnied. It wasn't loud, not desperate, just a sound of recognition. Of home. The band hesitated. Then the mare stepped forward. Brave took 3 steps to meet her. They touched noses. Lila's eyes widened. He knows them. Ray's throat went dry. They're survivors. From the fire. From the same storm that killed Heather. Somehow they'd made it. And now they were here, drawn back by one of their own. The wind shifted, stronger now. Then a distant snap. Smoke. Thin, faint, but real. Ray's radio crackled. All units be advised. Small ignition north of Sector 9. Gusting southwest. Crews en route. That was here. She looked back toward the band. They were too close to the slope. If the fire reached the canyon again, the horses would be trapped. There was no quick path out. Ray did the math. Angles, distances, burn speed. They had 15, maybe 20 minutes to move them. We got to drive them downhill, Ray said, already moving. Lila stepped in front of Brave, hand steady on his chest. He can lead them. Ray hesitated. Lila's voice was firm. He will. He stayed before. Now he'll move. The wind gusted again, stronger, sharper. The smoke thinned but spread. The band began to shift, nervous. Brave looked to Ray. She nodded. Go. And he did. He stepped toward the lead mare, brushed her shoulder with his muzzle, then turned, walked toward the low trail without looking back. One by one, the others followed. Ray and Lila moved in wide arcs behind them, guiding gently, using presence, not pressure. The slope was steep, but familiar. Brave walked without fear, without hesitation, like he was remembering something deeper than fear. The fire didn't catch them. They reached the lower basin just as the first engines arrived on the ridge above. Brave stood at the edge of the pasture, chest rising and falling with quiet triumph. The others circled him slowly, huffing, nudging, breathing him in like a map back to safety. Later, Ray sat on the barn's back step, watching dusk fold in. Lila lay curled in the hay beside Brave, her fingers tracing the ridge of his jaw. He didn't move. Just let her. You said I'd be gone in 2 days, Lila murmured. Ray looked up. That's what they told me. Do you want me to go? Ray's voice was low, unhurried. No. Lila picked at the hem of her sleeve. You think I'm broken? I think you've been put through fire. That doesn't make you broken. It makes you forged. Lila looked at Brave. Like him? Ray nodded. Exactly like him. For a while, no one spoke. Then Lila said, You know that drawing? I think I made it for him. Ray blinked. Why? Because I needed to believe someone would stay, even when it was hard, even when it hurt. Brave pressed his muzzle into her side, and she smiled, small and real. The wind outside carried no scent of smoke now, only the promise of something new. Morning arrived slowly over the ranch, casting soft gold across the dew-heavy fields. The barn door groaned open, with protesting the hour, and Ray stepped through with 2 mugs in her hands. Steam rose from both. She handed one to Lila, who sat with her knees tucked beneath her on a hay bale, already awake. Brave stood nearby, flanked by the newly rescued Mustang herd, their bodies loose and resting now, but their eyes never far from him. Lila took the mug carefully. You think they'll stay? Ray followed her gaze to the others. The pregnant mare had dropped her head, half asleep, nostrils flaring gently with each breath. If he does, Ray said, they might. Brave had changed since the return to Ridge Hollow. It wasn't dramatic. No rearing, no galloping across open plains like some wild spirit tale. It was quieter than that. He simply stood straighter, held his eyes longer, ate without needing to be coaxed. His ribs no longer stuck out like questions. His hooves no longer shook with every step. He had taken up space and let it belong to him. Lila leaned back against the stall post. I think he remembers more than he shows. I know he does. Ray didn't say it out loud, but the ridge still haunted her dreams. Not the fire, the moment before, the silence of it, the stillness of Foal too young to understand death, and too loyal to run from it. Ray had always thought grief was loud, sobbing, shouting, things breaking. But Brave had taught her it could be still as stone, and twice as heavy. The ranch had changed too. Where there were once rusted rails and sagging gates, Ray had started repairs. Not just because she needed to keep the herd safe, because the work grounded her, because the place deserved another life. So, did she? Brave had become more than a survivor. He had become a center point, the kind of presence Ray had never believed in outside of stories. He was quiet, but not passive. He watched everything, and he responded, not always in ways people expected, but in ways that mattered. Like that morning, when the mail truck pulled up the gravel road. Ray stepped outside, brushing her hands on her jeans. The driver, a young man who hadn't grown up with dust in his lungs, handed her a padded envelope and a curious look. This place used to be a training stable, right? Used to be. Looks like it's waking up again. Ray didn't answer, just nodded and took the envelope. It was heavier than she expected. The return address caught her eye. Nolan Lang. Lila came to stand beside her. Who's that? Ray ran her thumb across the label. Heather Lang's brother. Lila blinked. The woman from the fire? Ray nodded. She never had kids, but I guess he was listed as next of kin. Inside the envelope was a small framed photograph. Heather and Dusty, taken in front of a trailer, the background blurred by light. The dog's ears were alert, eyes happy, and behind them, almost out of frame, was Brave, much younger, standing in a portable pen. There was also a note, handwritten, ink slightly smudged. Ray, I didn't know Heather was rescuing that many animals. We'd fought over it. Said she was wasting time. But when I saw what you did, what the Foal did, I realized I'd been wrong. Dusty died protecting something Heather believed in. And that Foal, he didn't just survive. He chose to stay. I think she would have wanted him to have a home. A real one. Thank you. Nolan. Lila touched the edge of the photo. She loved him. Ray stared at the picture for a long moment. She died trying to save him. And he didn't forget. That evening, Ray walked into the barn with hammer and nails. Above Brave's stall, just under Dusty's melted dog tag, she hung the photo. Brave looked at it for a long time, then pressed his forehead against the wall beneath it. No one spoke. The weeks passed. The herd settled. The mare gave birth one morning just before sunrise. Ray and Lila found her curled around a wobbly-legged foal still damp from the world. Brave stood nearby, a silent guardian. Lila named the new foal Hope, and Hope followed Brave everywhere. It was a strange thing to watch one who had been so shattered become the one others followed. But maybe that's how healing worked. Not through forgetting, but through remembering the pain without letting it define you. The ranch filled slowly, not with people, but with rhythm. Fencing got fixed. The feed room was cleaned out. Old hay bales were burned and replaced. Ray started recording herd activity, tracking patterns. Lila kept a sketchbook filled with drawings. Brave leading the others. Hope trying to climb his back. Ray asleep in the pasture. One drawing Ray found one day stopped her cold. It was of her and Lila, not posing, not smiling, just standing shoulder to shoulder. Between them, Brave. Above them, a single word. Home. She folded it and placed it in her coat pocket. When fall arrived, a counselor from the Child Services office visited the ranch. She asked questions, checked cupboards, took notes. Then she sat down across from Ray and said, Lila's case is complicated. She's not adoptable in the traditional sense. She's been returned 4 times. One placement said she never spoke a word. Another said she fought with the other kids. She hasn't fought here. I believe you, but the system doesn't see healing. It sees records. What does she want? She wants to stay. Ray didn't answer right away. Her eyes drifted to the window, where Lila sat brushing Brave's coat, humming something Ray couldn't quite hear. The Foal Hope lay beside them, legs tucked under like a content shadow. I don't need the system to see, Ray said. I just need them to allow it. The counselor paused. Then we'll start the paperwork. Lila didn't cry when Ray told her. She nodded, jaw tight. But that night, Ray found a note folded on the kitchen table. It was drawn in marker, the letters slightly uneven. Thank you for staying, even when I didn't ask. Underneath it, a crude sketch of Ray, Brave, and Lila standing at the ridge, the wind lifting their hair and mane in the same direction. 1 month later, Ray stood before the county livestock board. She had filed to register the herd under her name. Mustangs descended from Ridge Hollow, survivors of fire, now protected by a sanctuary designation. She showed them the sketches, the tracking logs, DNA samples she'd sent off to verify Brave's unique markings. When they asked the herd's origin, Ray said simply, they're descended from loss, but they chose to live. That should count for something. They approved her motion that night. Ray carved a small wooden sign and nailed it to the post at the end of the ranch's long dirt road. Brave Hollow Sanctuary. No fanfare, no ribbon, just the wind, the hills, and the silence of something old and sacred being made new. Inside the barn, Brave watched as Lila fed Hope, her laughter echoing off the rafters. And outside, the wind chimes sang again, not with sorrow, but would return.